Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me in another episode of Coffee with Genially. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Laurie Guyon. She is the lead coordinator for instructional technology programs at VOCIS and a recognized edtech leader, author, and trainer known for her work advancing digital learning and K 12 computer science education. So, please welcome Laurie.
Hello. So great to be here. Good to see you, Carla.
Yeah, good to see you again. We actually just saw each other at ISTE, where we met in person. ISTE was such a great event, just so much energy and teachers really passionate about education, how to, innovate in their classroom. So it was great to see you there, Laurie. Did you like it?
I did. ISTE's always very busy for me, but it is those moments that you get to catch up with people in the hallways or on the expo floor. It just gives you a chance to kind of breathe in all the excitement and learn new things and reconnect with people that you probably only see once a year at ISTE.
Right. And you had a lot of sessions, didn't you?
I did. I had 7 sessions this time.
Uh,
Every year I say I'm gonna do a little less, and I am a little less. The most I ever did was 11, and I said that was too much because I didn't feel like I had the time to have those conversations. I was always running
yeah.
to the next thing. So yeah, 7 was a good sweet spot. I think next year I might try for 5. That might be where I go
Every time a
next, just
little.
to kind of find it. Yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit,
I
just
guess.
so
I mean, there's so much to do at EST that if you do so many
yeah.
sessions, you don't have the time to do all of them.
Yeah, or you're in the middle of a really good conversation and you realize you have to run away and you don't want to have to do that. So yeah, I just there's so much to take in at ISTE. I feel like I need to take in more, which is always a good thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Get right into it, Laurie. Well, your
Sure.
journey in education and technology leaders very inspiring. Can you share what sparked that passion for using technology?
Yeah. So actually, teaching is not my first career, it's my third. I
Wow.
graduated with my master's in teaching, and yeah, I know, crazy, right? And there were no teaching jobs to be had. I was working, lots of part time jobs just trying to make ends meet. So I ended up getting a job working for an insurance company just to pay the bills, really. Very quickly, I shifted from I was in fire claims. I learned all like how to handle homeowners claims and how to rebuild houses and all those kind of things. Lots of really cool skills. But what was neat for me is while I was going through my training, and then when I shifted to actually training others within that insurance company, is we were completely paperless. We didn't have printers at all. Everything we did was on a computer. All of my modules to learn how to handle insurance claims were on asynchronous modules. I was doing online videos and answering questions. When I needed to write a letter to an insured, I was doing it through a telephone where I was, it was voice typing it in, and then there was somebody on the other end that would kind of fix it up. And when I went into teaching, so after I left there and I raised a family for a little while, ran a daycare at my home, and then decided to go back into teaching or try it for the right, the real first time, right? And I was walked into that first classroom and I was handed a box of chalk and a stack of textbooks. And I just looked around and I said, this isn't what the real world is anymore. It's not about, the content in the text and being able to regurgitate it or write it on the board. So I quickly bought a projector. I shifted all of the desks away from the chalkboard towards a blank wall, and I started doing everything electronically. I talked to a company that was selling like clickers back then, and got clickers with my students so I can get them to interact with technology. And then I was fortunate enough in 2013, our district decided to pilot iPads. So I was part of the 6th grade team that got to pilot them. And that changed everything for me. I was like, finally, we're here. This is what I saw in the business world. Now I can bring it to education. And very quickly, again, I shifted out of the classroom and into the training role, which is kind of what led me to the jobs I have now. I found that the technology, when used right, it's not just another thing to learn. If it's used the right way, can really engage students, can really motivate students, can really help them with collaboration and communication and creativity. It just needed to be harnessed. And I just felt like this is what's getting students ready for, what we always say, the real world. It's going to give them the skills they need to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about bringing technology into the classroom and that transformation and that process while you adapt to it. So,
Yeah.
what does future ready really mean for schools today, and how can technology help us get there without being overwhelming both for the student and the teacher?
Yeah, so when I teach, because I train teachers as much as I'm pushing into classrooms and doing things with students. And a lot of times the teachers feel like, well, I never learned how to use this, right? I didn't have technology classes in my teacher training. And we don't want that for our students. We want our students so that no matter what they choose to do when they leave our doors, they're ready for it, right? So we don't want them to never feel this overwhelming, oh gosh, I don't know digital literacy. I don't know computer science. I don't know how to use whatever tool it happens to be. We need to give them those skills. And really, it's not the skills on how to use a specific program. It's the collaboration, it's the creativity, it's problem solving and critical thinking. It's knowing how to work with others from all over the world. I mean, we're very fortunate in education that we get to do that, right?
Yeah.
I was working on a project that I'm for a presentation I'm doing at the Rural Schools conference that's next week. And I found a video that I did 8 years ago where I did a mystery Skype with a third grade class with me in New York and another school in Ohio. And just seeing the excitement on the students' faces of getting to learn about other parts of the world. And this was a really close one, right? We're only talking New York to Ohio. They're not that far apart. But it was enough for students to be like, wow, we're getting to talk to people that are not in our school or in our community. And I think being future ready is all of that. We need to open up these opportunities and give students experiences. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, right? We didn't know that, a few years ago, AI was going to blossom. AI has been around for 70 years. It's always just been there, but now it's something so major. So I
Yeah.
feel like we don't know what's coming next. We just know that we have to make sure our students have the foundation so they never feel that overwhelming feeling that a lot of our teachers feel today.
You mentioned this, having kids being able to see other parts of the world and having technology connect us in this way. Is there any other example that you have of integrating edtech into the classroom and having like a meaningful change, something that you remember very fondly of an experience that you had where you said like, this was really successful, I really loved integrating this into a classroom, it's a game changer?
Yeah, so when I taught in the class, I taught sixth grade. At some point, I taught all subjects in sixth grade, but by the time I left the class, I was really just teaching English. And one year, I was on I want to say it was a Twitter chat or some sort of online something that were a bunch of educators were on. I really wish I could remember what it was. I just don't. But
Mhm.
I met a woman who was she was from Ireland, but she was stationed in Vietnam, and she was working with international students there, and she was also a sixth grade teacher, and she was looking to connect with another English teacher. So I raised my hand. I'm like, sure, we can figure this out. Now there's a 12-hour time difference between our two classes, so we had to kind of figure out how we were going to handle that. So what we did is I would and I believe we used Skype back then, but you could use Zoom or
Yeah.
whatever now. But
Totally.
but we I was able to greet her students as they were coming in the morning by even though I was in my pajamas at home, right? To be able to say hello. And then this was way before we had a lot of technology, so we didn't have a lot of programs that allowed us to connect like we do now. So we just had a spreadsheet, and we had the students' names on the spreadsheet, and then we connected them with another student between the two classes, and we would put links to whatever it is we were doing on the spreadsheet and just shared it between our students and their students. So their students created these amazing websites with everything that they were doing. And my students were really curious about that. We didn't have access to anything to create a website at the time. So we decided we wanted to make a video, and it's out on YouTube. You can actually still see it. So we made a video of a day in the life in our hometown. And we were in Schuylerville, New York, a really small farming town right on the border of Vermont. And so we created this video of what life was like for us. And it was a very rural area. And the students in Vietnam happened to live in a city. So they were showcasing that they walk to school, and they take public transportation that is so unusual to students. The biggest takeaway for them was the difference in what we eat for breakfast. So because when the students made their videos back, they shared what they were eating. And they were eating soup and noodles and dumplings and all these really like good foods. And the students like, I just had a
It's like
Pop Tart.
lunch meat instead of
Right?
breakfast for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was completely unusual for them. And it was such a great experience. We read Love That Dog between the two classes, we shared we interviewed people in our family and we shared those interviews back and forth. So it was just a rich experience of just exposing students to what life was like on the other end of the world. And it really changed for me. It made me say, I need to do more of this. And I mean, I could tell you story after story of connecting with schools around the world that have just been absolutely incredible experiences for both me and for my students.
Do you know if any of these connections between students have, lasted more than just the class? If they have gone on to become like friendships?
I haven't seen that, and a lot of it's because I've kept changing schools, right? So,
Mhm.
in my role now at BOCES, I work at WSWHE BOCES, which is in upstate New York, just north of Albany. And we have 31 school districts. So I push into classes, but a lot of times I'm only in that class once or twice and then I don't see them
Okay.
again,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But we definitely have the more of that connection with the adults. So, for example, in 2020, when the world had shut down for everybody, I worked with a world language teacher. She wanted to connect her students with another part of the world, and she worked with a nonprofit organization called Pure Water for the World, where they were looking at bringing clean water and sanitation to areas of the world that don't have it. So we were able to connect with a woman who was living in Trojes in Honduras, and the students were able to video in and learn from her what life was like in Trojes. Trojes is a very small village. There's no clean water or sanitation in their schools or in their homes. The children have to walk miles to get water from the river, which often is contaminated. Many children don't live to adulthood because of the contamination in the water. So what we were able to do was learn a hand washing song in both English and Spanish, and then we learned how biosand filters work, and so we tied in some science in there. And then the students did a fundraiser to raise money to actually send one of these biosand filters to Honduras. There's now several. They've done this every year since.
Wow.
They cost about $100, so they're not terribly expensive, but they last 100 years. So now this village will have clean water and sanitation for 100 plus years. And not that you'll go visit Trojes, but if you ever do, we do have our stickers that are on there. So the kids always say someday maybe we'll get there and see it. But it's just a neat experience to be able to bring the world to our kids.
For sure.
And
And like the impact that you're making, even though you don't know them personally and you cannot see, physically what you're doing, but just the fact that you know that you're making a real impact in a class, I think
yeah.
that is something that only technology in this way can do, right, for us.
Yeah,
It's so
and that's where when you're talking about future ready, that's today ready, right? That we're
yeah.
able to connect like that. I mean, that this was unheard of, 20 years ago, where we were able to do what we're doing now.
Okay, so we talked about the successful experiences, and now what do you think? From what you've done, from what you've seen others educators do, what are the most successful digital learning environments have in common? So, what do you need to do to make this work, to make technology work in the classroom?
Yeah, great question. For me, I think it's the ability to fail forward. When I was first learning a lot of the technology, I would say to the students, "We're going to figure this out together." I remember the first year hour of code was happening, and I heard about it through an email I got, and I said, to my students, "Do you want to try it?" It was the week before our winter break, in December, and I said, "I don't know what coding really is, but let's see if we can figure it out together." And this was, oh gosh, I don't remember how long ago the first year was, but it was a long time ago. And the students were so excited to try it. And we, it took us the week to do the hour, even though, nowadays the kids can do it in about a half an hour, but we did the maze activities within code.org. We watched the videos together. We helped each other out. And I always tell this story that I had a group of students that year that English was not their first language. And I had one student who didn't speak any English, really struggled with school, was a bit of, I want to call him an introvert, but I think it was more because he was uncomfortable talking. He had never had a conversation with me. He really didn't produce much work. We worked closely with our English language, support, and we did what we could, but I just didn't feel like I was reaching him. And when we did that hour of code, it's just like something blossomed in him. He was able to have it read to him, with the different features that are built in, and he just got it. Like something clicked for him. By the end of that first half hour on that first day, he came up to me all on his own and asked if I would give him more time with it. He wanted to know if he could do more. And so I opened up the 20-hour, course for him. I had a seventh grade teacher who happened to be next door, and I said, "Hey, and he was doing it in his class too because we had talked about it." And I said, "Can I put him on your your group so he can do it?" And absolutely. So we did that. By the end of the week, he had finished the 20-hour course, and
Wow.
students were starting to ask him to sit with them at lunch so he could help them with what they were doing on the programs because they brought their iPads to lunch with them. They were inviting him to hang out on the playground just to chat. It just changed the world for him. And I think that I had to take the risk of I don't know what I'm doing, right? We were learning together, but he ended up being the expert in the room that we all relied on for that week. And I mean, I've done Hour of Code every year since with whatever group of students I can get access to, and I have those experiences over and over where there's a student that may struggle in general, but all of a sudden blossoms in this environment. And I think for if you want to have a technology rich classroom, you have to be okay with the fact that it may fail or it may not go the way you want, or you may not be the expert. You have to be the facilitators of the learning process, not so much the sage on the stage, as they say.
And in that way, it's also making students active participants, right? Not just listeners and just, passive in a class, but just kind of working together, being active during class, being able to explore at their own pace. I think that's like really important for them in the use of technology, right?
Yeah, I think that with students, if you and I've seen this, like I'll go into like 7 first grade classes in one day, right? We'll do the same lesson, and the attitude of the teacher can completely change the way the students see themselves as
Percent.
far as
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So if I go into a class and the teacher's like, "We're going to try this, let's see what happens, and we're going to learn together," and they're more open about their abilities, the kids are willing to try it and they're less likely to raise their hand and wait for the next instruction, right? But the classes where the teacher's like, I think this is over their head, or this is really scary, or I don't think my kids can do this, the kids really won't do it. They'll raise their hand and wait for the next direction. They'll be afraid to push the button. They'll look for support on every step of the process instead of exploring on their own. So I think we do that to our own students sometimes. And I don't think it's a bad thing in some ways, right? You need to teach them math skills. They need to follow you step by step. But when you're doing something with technology or you're doing something that is outside of your comfort zone, you can level that playing field a little bit
Yeah.
more by giving students that opportunity to explore.
Definitely. And the attitude you mentioned, I think it's essential to have a open attitude and be positive. I think that's how you communicate better and students actually, yeah, enjoy a class better. I remember back in when I was a kid, just having like those different teachers, right? Ones that had like more of a strict attitude or like close-minded, and then the ones that were really open to try new things, new activities, different formats for the class. I learned so much more with those that were open to having new experiences, new ways of teaching rather than just the regular lecture form class. So yeah,
Yeah,
definitely I think attitude can make a big difference in a class.
absolutely.
Well, we've talked about kind of like the class level, but I want to know. I know you've led statewide initiatives to help with, in New York with computer science and digital fluency. What have you learned about scaling innovation across district or entire states?
Yeah. So we have in New York State, we have computer science and digital fluency standards. They were adopted as of 2020. So right in the middle of everything that was going on, we had these new standards to try to start to roll out. They were supposed to be fully implemented K-12 as of this September. I was fortunate enough to be on the authoring committee for those standards. There have been other groups that have been involved in it since as well, building more at the younger levels and working on some different ideas as far as how to implement the standards. New York State started these Smart Start programs to get districts that wanted to adopt early and build some of the ideas and lessons around what it could look like in our classrooms. I was fortunate enough, I'm on the NICEGate board. NICEGate is the New York State Association for Computers and Technology and Education. I was able to work with them to help with some of the Smart Start programs and also create activities and videos, asynchronous lessons, let's call that, and some synchronous as well on what the standards could look like in action. And through my BOCES, we do a lot of that training as well. I've done everything from the outlining what the standards are and figuring out where they fit, and looking at how we're going to implement them, who's going to be responsible for them, to creating lessons and activities. I have activity books that I created on Book Creator that allow for teachers to get ideas. We have a website that have different activities. The idea is we want to make sure that these standards aren't one more thing in the classroom. They really need to be integrated in what we're already doing. And that makes it so much easier for teachers that are maybe a little bit more nervous in teaching. And it's not just about coding. And it was interesting. I teach for Manhattanville University. I teach methods for teaching computer science. And and at the end of the class this semester, one of the students wrote, I always thought computer science just meant coding, but now I realize it's so much more. And it really is. There's an impact that our world has had on technology. We've already talked about that with some of the examples we've talked about, right? Where,
Yeah.
the fact that we can video into a village in an area that, normally we wouldn't have access to is something we couldn't do without technology. It's redefining how we learn. And so I think that looking at these standards really is thinking about how do we learn in the environment we have now. Everyone's worried about AI and what it is doing or not doing, and you can't. It's not good or all bad. It isn't a black and white discussion. It's all the areas of gray. This opens up so much opportunity to talk about bias, to talk about patterns and algorithms and why things work the way they do and how things work. Right? We want to make sure that our students are getting that opportunity to explore, like we've talked about, and also give them an opportunity to think about what could be done. Right? To be the inventors and the innovators of tomorrow. And I think for teachers, it's a scary time in education because we have so many scripted curriculums, we have so many pacing guides, and the thought of adding one more thing can seem very overwhelming. So, but when you think about it, like if you're reading a book, a children's book, a picture book, there's a pattern to it. It follows an algorithm probably. Most of our adventure stories follow like the hero's journey. That's an algorithm, right? So we're already doing a lot of those computational thinking foundational things. We talk about data in class. We talk about exploration. We talk about the fact that you have to be kind online, right, with digital citizenship and whatnot. So we're just trying to make it a little more explicit where now the students are knowing the words behind it. So instead of telling your students to line up by rainbow colors, we're going to say today's algorithm is red first, then yellow, and so on. So we're going to help them to see how patterns work and how an algorithm is formed and how computers work in general. So I feel like these standards are in place and they're really good for K-12. It's not so everyone's going to be a coder when they're done. It's not that everyone's going to go into computer science, but it's going to give them the foundational skills so that way when they're in the workforce or they go to college, they're going to know what is happening and be able to build on the skills that they've already have the foundation for.
Yeah, and even if they need to do some of these skills can be translated or to other things, right? Or
Sure.
knowing how to use one tool helps you become more proficient at another one. So even if they don't get, they're not the best ones at coding and doing all of this stuff, for sure it's gonna help them be able to be more proficient when they use different tools once they grow up. I think, once you get the hang of like a few good tools, then it's so much easier to just learn and have like a faster learning curve when you're getting to know a new tool or a new technology. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to think about, that everything that we are teaching our students, there's a problem solving skill that they need. There's the ability to work with others. There's empathy. Those kind of things are so important for us to be teaching the students. And I think, computer science can do that for us, or computational thinking can do that. I don't actually have a degree in computer science. My bachelor's is speech and hearing and my master's is teaching. I have my admin degree, but nowhere in there did I learn computer science from a class. I learned it through other educators, through online programs, through, different companies that have different robotics and things. That's how I learned, everything that I do with computer science.
Yeah, that's really cool. That means that you are very disciplined to be able to learn something just by yourself. Not It's
Yeah. Well,
not
I mean,
easy, I think.
it's not. Well, I mean, when I think about like my classroom, like I said, I taught English before I left, and I remember having the students like write an essay, and they hated editing, But when we started bringing in robotics, I had a Sphero robot that we used. It was the Spark back then, and we were doing some different coding activities with the robot and tying it into what we were doing in our English class. And I started to notice that the students had no problem debugging their code to make it work. So if I started calling debugging, they have to debug their essay so that the reader can understand it,
Mhm.
just like a computer needs to understand a line of code. All of a sudden, students were all in on actually editing their essay, right?
That
It's
is
just you
very
have to,
intelligent.
right? It's
Yeah.
all about bringing those real world skills. Like if your reader can't read your sentence, it's not going to be able to do whatever it is you wanted to do if you're trying to persuade them to something or whatever. No different than if a computer can't read a line of code, it's going to give you an error message, right? It's not going to work the way you
Yeah.
want it to.
Wow, that's a very smart like comparison, and for sure, I think kids would like definitely love that. Be, yeah, I think wow, no worries. Um, all right. Well, now since we were at Easty last week, and we saw so many tools out there, awesome tools, edtech, different technologies that people are using right now. How do you choose the right technology, not just the trendiest one?
Yeah.
What's your, I don't know, criteria or advice for people trying to see what tools work in the classroom?
Yeah, I think this all goes back to the why we're teaching, right? There's a an objective. There's something you want the students to be able to do, and I think you have to focus more on your learning objective than the tool. If you're focusing on the tool, then you're just using the tool. You're not actually teaching the students whatever it is you need them to know. We have a lot of content to get through,
Yeah.
so it's not always right. And most tools, there's an overlap with all the tools, right? Some of them, let's say all the coding robotics, for example, all of them have some level of code that the students are going to be able to use. Some might light up, some might roll, some might drive, some might raise arms, some might dance, whatever it happens to be. They all have different ways that you can use them, but in the end you're still teaching coding if that's what your learning objective is. If you want your students to learn how to write an algorithm or what decomposition is, there's so many different ways you can do it, and you have to use the tool that's going to make the most sense, that it keeps the focus on the learning and helps the students with whatever that outcome is that you want. There are so many great tools, especially like today. I mean, you saw, I mean, how many aisles were there? I don't even know how many vendors were,
Or I
were
think at
in
least
that expo
200,
hall.
at least 200
Right, it
vendors.
had to be.
It was just
Yeah, and they're all right. They're all wonderful in their own way. And if you have a tool, if a teacher has a tool that they absolutely love to use and it works for what they're doing, there's no reason to move on to something else.
yeah,
But if that tool isn't working for whatever reason, or you're getting frustrated with it, or there's a cost involved that you can't overcome, that there probably is going to be another tool that can kind of help too. I think there's things to look at though when you do look at tools. So when I analyze a new tool, I like to think about it as how versatile is it. And for a math teacher, they're going to say, I want to find one that works for math. I totally get that. But in my role, because I'm not only teaching math, I'm teaching English and social studies and everything in some way or another. I'm always looking at how easy is it for students. My biggest question I always ask is, how many clicks does it take before a student gets in? There was one tool one time, it had 11 clicks before the
yeah,
student can get in every day. That's a lot of clicks. And if I'm working with my littles, that's too much, right? The older kids maybe can handle it. But thinking about how easy it is to sign on, and we have tools that help us with that, right? We have, Clever or ClassLink, those kind of things help us with that. But once they're in, how many clicks till they're successful on something does matter. Is it scaffolded? Is it accessible? That's a big one. How many languages does it translate to? Does it have text to speech, speech to text? Can you change the color contrast, right? The things that matter to make sure that it's accessible for all students. And then is it flexible enough for whatever it is you're doing? For example, Genially has so many different, game boards and activities and choice boards that I think that it offers this foundation for whatever it is you want to do with your students, right? So it's not about, does it work for math? It's, can it do the things I need it to do that I can add my math to, right? So I think it's a shift in that conversation to
yeah.
how easy to use, is it accessible and that sort of thing.
Yeah, in a way, it's the tool adapting to you instead of you adapting to the tool, right?
100%. Yeah, and, Liz Kolb, who, does the Triple E framework, she always says, is are they focusing in on the tool or are they focusing in on the learning? And if the tool is taking away from that, then the learning has been shifted to something different, right? So, if you have Genially has a really fun dice that rolls, right? So if the student is constantly just rolling the dice and not doing the work, then they're getting too caught up in the function of it. I don't think that's going to happen with the dice, but there are other tech tools that could totally
Yeah,
happen with, where the students start, they'll rush through the problems to get to the game, right? If the game is the reward after they've answered however many questions.
yeah. And given your experience with tools like Genially, Seesaw, Nearpod, which platform features do you think are the most underused by instructional
Oh,
designers today?
that's a really cool question. I love it. So, I mean, I use all three of these tools an awful lot. I love them. Nearpod, actually, I always say, is the very first app I've ever used, both professionally or personally. I didn't have an Apple phone when I got my first iPad in the classroom, so I learned with my students on Nearpod. I think for me, it's the interactives. We focus so much again on the content pieces, like making the slides look pretty, but really it's the interactives where the students are giving you information and you can guide them in a certain way, using the ability to add video, that using the ability to add their voice, I think really makes a difference, and kids love it. I had the students, they were creating at second graders, they were creating their stories online, and they couldn't wait to be able to add their voice and read their stories out loud. And I think we don't take advantage of that. And then the reflection piece, right? Whether you're using Genially to have, a page where they're going to answer a question, or you're going to have some sort of interactive where they're going to do a poll. I think those things matter. And Nearpod has the polls, Nearpod has the collaborate boards. Seesaw has, it's just like it. If you want a tool, it's there, right? You just have to open it up for the students and give them some guidance on how you want them to use it. So I feel like getting the students to showcase their learning all the way through, right? Focusing more on that process versus the product. I think that, like I'm going to give an example. I was working with a first or second grader, I don't remember now, and she was saying that she was having difficulty using technology. So I asked her to show me what she was doing, and she happened to be using Seesaw, and she was just taking her worksheet and putting it in there. And she said it's too hard for the kids to manipulate, move around. I'm like, because this is just easier doing a worksheet, right? But if you really want to see the power of a tech tool, have the students have one problem at a time, have them voice over, showcase how they did the problem versus just putting the answer down, which is what you're doing
Yeah.
on the worksheet. And I think that's what we have to do, is think about how much this information you can get from the students versus how much information you can give to the students.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's again what we talked about before, the students becoming like active participants in a
Yeah,
class and not just receivers of information. I think that
totally.
is definitely the key.
Yeah, we want those kids as active as we are. I mean, every study shows, if you look at research, the more sensors you use, the more likely the information is going to stick, right? So why don't we want to use all of the voice, the hearing, the seeing, the talking? We want to use all of it as often as we can to make sure the students are engaged and motivated and actually learning.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now to wrap things up, this question I always ask to everyone for like some advice for new instructional designers. But in this case, I want to know what's your advice for looking to future proof their skills, in this fast changing edtech landscape. How can they not stay behind and just like, have the skills to just be able to continue using technology and adopting these new apps and, trends and everything like that?
Sure. I think in the ed tech world, we really have to come back to the focus of what is good teaching, right? We have universal design for learning, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. That's where we have to focus our time. Once you have that in place and the students are involved in every part of the process, then you can add the tool that's going to help make that happen. So if you really want the students to create a video, you want to make sure that the process of getting there is going to be grounded in good pedagogy. When you think about making sure that students are represented, making sure that everything is accessible, you're making sure that the students show ways to express what they've learned. And it doesn't always have to be the same thing. Not every student wants to be a podcaster or a video maker. Some kids still love to do the poster, right? There's nothing wrong with that sometimes, that if they're still showcasing their learning in the best way. And I think that's what we have to think about is, don't try to learn all the tools. Focus in on the one or two that are working really well. And if there's something else that you need that those tools aren't offering, then you look for something else that's going to help fill it. And then ask the students what they want. They should really be involved in every part of the learning process. My sixth graders designed how our classroom looked every year. That was one of their first projects, was what did they want their classroom to be? How did they learn best? And I think you have to keep students involved in that. And if the students are really enjoying things like, we'll say TikTok, for example, they're loving short form video, have them making short form video or watching short form video. Use the tools that they find engaging. Just take it out of TikTok. We're not going to have them go there, but you can certainly make it for the classroom. So I think, yes, you want to expose students to different ways. And yes, some traditional methods are still incredibly important. But I think you have to keep the focus on what is good teaching. What does the research say, in order to make sure that we're reaching every student.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Laurie, for experiences, wisdom, everything that you shared with us today. I really enjoyed this episode.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great having coffee with Genially.
Yeah. And we love you here at Genially. We always have you in mind for everything. Thank you again for
Thank you.
joining us, everyone. And I'll see you next month for another episode of Coffee with Genially. Bye bye.